Hey, everybody. 3 times this week, I've had the pleasure of interviewing someone for my podcast. I love that we get to live stream these so you all can listen in, and then they're aired on my podcast at different points, 6, 8 weeks from now. So this is a really cool episode. Really excited you join us. This is actually, we're recording for episode 351. So when this goes live, we'll have actually passed 350 episodes, which I don't know. I did not plan for this to be a thing when I got started 7 years ago. All right. So without any further delay, here is this week's guest. Today's guest knows that if you want to build a better future, you've got to build a better now. He shares new angles on how any one of 7 unique directives builds self-esteem in moments, increases focus, and improves how we show up today as leaders, team members, and communicators. He's a dynamic and engaging professional speaker utilizing humor and juggling to make his ideas stick with his audience. He's spoken in 27 countries, including tours across Russia, Iceland, Europe, and Australia. I've had the pleasure of witnessing his high energy and highly entertaining virtual presentation skills. A Renaissance man, he's also an award-winning documentarian with films screened on all 7 continents. He started and still runs an international humanitarian nonprofit that supports Haiti and was even the lead singer and lyricist for a touring punk band. Please join me in welcoming Greg Bennick. Hey, Greg.
Hi, thank you so much. I love that introduction. It's amazing.
You're
so happy.
amazing.
No, you're amazing. This is incredible. What's funny, we all do lots of things. And if any listener heard the biography of their life, no matter what it was, had a job for 20 years, raised 2 kids, went to college, bought a car, bought a different car, it would seem like a lot. And when you're reading my bio, I'm like, it seems like a lot, but I'm remembering all the things. So it's kind of fun.
Well, thanks for joining us from your place in Seattle, Washington. Thrilled to have you on the show. As you know, this is a show about building strong networks, and the context is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
Leadership is about empathic listening and also having directives rooted in experience. So it's a combination of those 2 things. It's having the experience to offer directives to people, but not orders. And it's about working with other people from the perspective of really empathically listening to them. And if you can somehow weave empathic listening with directives that come from experience, you have the potential to lead and lead well. And I think about the people who do lead well. And I'm going to put you on the spot just for a second.
Okay.
When you and I worked on the virtual keynote, that I was the keynote speaker, and you were behind the scenes working your production wizardry. There's no other way to describe it. I watched you do something that people rarely can do, which is direct and almost, I don't want to say order, but direct, like I think it was 12 people about how to set up their virtual, how to appear on camera, ways to approach the virtual environment. And you did it with this empathic listening and these directives for them that were rooted in immense amounts of experience. And you were immediately the leader without being forceful. You were immediately the leader without being demanding. You were empathically listening to people's concerns about, what do I look like? Is this okay what I'm wearing? Is the lighting okay? Do I sound okay? Am I too short, too tall? Should I lean this way? You were so helpful for all 12, as I remember, maybe even more, I can't recall, of those people. You were a leader in the classic sense. Every single person felt empowered by your empathy and by the confident directives that you offered. So when a leader is like you, they end up in a situation where everyone feels empowered. And you certainly did that for all of us on that call. So I'm throwing that out there as an example for people, that if you want to be, of course. If you want to be a good leader, I think it's essential to listen well. I think it's essential to, just offer your expertise, but to do so in a way that people end up feeling like it was almost like the idea was in them all along. And I think that that's certainly what you offered. So when I realized, to the second part of your question, that I could be a leader, it was early on in life, and it wasn't with the fullness of the definition even that I just offered about empathic listening. I mean, I was a kid basically, but I am descended from a mom who's an incredible speaker, an incredible communicator, an empathic listener, and somebody who really embodies the definition that I gave a few minutes ago. And growing up, I realized that I had the capacity at least to speak, and that things like debate or being in front of a room didn't intimidate me. And I thought, okay, if I can speak and I can command a room and I can share stories effectively and speak clearly, maybe I could add in the other things that my mom is as well. Basically, I just wanted to be like my mom and speak effectively and speak in a way that was empowering to people. And that's when I got the barest inklings of leadership, was from being able to command a room and speak to people in a way which was generous, for lack of a better word.
I appreciate your definition and that example. Empathic listening, I haven't heard that phrase. I mean, I feel like in a long time, it's been a while. I love that you're sort of focusing our attention on it. And thank you for your kind words. I mean, this is how you and I got to first meet, was through that event. We've since connected a few times other ways. But it is one of those moments when like two professionals like find each other doing their best work. It is a magical moment. I'm curious how old you were at the point where you started to like get into speaking and thinking about this for yourself. Like, is this high school? Is this college? Like, how young were you?
Younger. I was probably in 6th or 7th grade at the latest, probably 6th grade, because when I was in 6th grade, I learned, it's going to sound like I've lost my mind, but I learned how to juggle. And when I learned how to juggle, it was the first time that I ever could do something that other kids couldn't do. I'm not adept at sports. I'm not a football player, a baseball player, a racquetball player. I could probably throw darts. But I mean, other than that, I'm not very sports based. But when I learned how to juggle, which is a story in and of itself, all of a sudden I could do something that other kids couldn't do. So kids were turning to me, looking at me, watching me do this thing. And it put me in a performative position. And a performative meaning like literal performance, where I was offering something that I had as a talent or skill to share, and people were watching me. And in that theatrical sort of relationship, I started to communicate. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe I can, do that in other ways. And I remember joining debate, like I mentioned earlier, and that sort of thing. And that's where it all started to come together. I mean, I did my first professional performance as a juggler when I was 13 years old. I think I just had turned 13. So that's where it all started for me.
I'm curious what you were like on the playground, like before that, in those earlier years, like like in grade school. Like, it sounds like were you kind of quiet? You hadn't quite found your voice yet before the juggling?
I remember my friend Brent and I would walk around at recess and talk. We would talk about like politics or things that we heard in the news, or we would talk about like the dynamics in the school or the cool kids. We would literally just talk. It was kind of like, the old movie My Dinner with Andre, but on the playground. And I think these like two little kids just like walk around conversing and like pontificating about things. Yeah, I was really just in my head. I just spent my time with, just books and encyclopedias and things. And I guess I was vocal, but I never really connected it with any sort of performance or theatrical endeavor, really. I think it was just me thinking and talking about things. But yeah, I mean, I played games and whatnot with friends, but I wasn't the kid on the playground who was, alpha-ing, if that's a word, being the alpha kid on the playground and making sure that I was on the kickball team or the baseball team or the whatever team. I mean, I tried and failed at baseball and soccer too, I remember, Yeah, I mean, case in point, the soccer stories, actually, it just came to me. I haven't thought about this in a while, but I joined a soccer team, and I mean, I might have been in 4th grade or something. And I remember running down the field and everyone was yelling like, I'm open, kick it to me or whatever. And I started running down the field, and I realized as I was running down the field that if the player with the ball kicked it to me, that I would either continue on and score a goal or that I would not. And that ultimately either of those outcomes was essentially irrelevant, given kind of like the fundamentally like meaningless nature of what we were doing, which is playing a game.
Gosh.
And as I'm running down the field, I'm like, there's no purpose to be doing this.
You're like a nihilist.
I quit. Yeah, I quit. I was like this like little nihilist, like I probably
Nihilist fourth grader
yeah,
soccer player.
yeah, existentially, like, just completely upset and just yeah, and then I ended up quitting soccer. I haven't thought about that in forever, but it's absolutely
Wow.
true. So anyway,
I mean, I like hearing that story because it has some sense of like where you started, right? And like your journey from that point. So 12, 13 years old, you're learning how to juggle. Did you have a sense at that time what you wanted to do later in life, career-wise? Like,
okay.
was there a path laid out in front of you by your family, by expectations, by your own like interests? Like, what was the plan?
Certainly. So my parents both have advanced degrees, and they have just carved their own way through life. But they certainly were advocates for master's degrees and that sort of thing. And I had one intention and one intention only, which was my real interest was coins. I loved collecting coins as a little kid, and I wanted to collect coins. And I actually went to a junior high school, middle school that had after school courses in baseball and knitting. I mean, all sorts of hobbies and sports and different things. You could take after school mini courses. Well, I petitioned the school for there to be a coin collecting class and went through all of these hoops in order to make sure there was a coin collecting class. And when I signed up for the coin collecting class, the school secretary signed me up accidentally for juggling by mistake. And I showed up in that juggling class on the first day, and my life was essentially over. I mean, I was not going to be a coin collector anymore, which is what I dreamed of. I was just going to be this juggler. I mean, I thought this was ridiculous. And when I walked into the class, there was a young boy in the class, and he was juggling 3 white baseballs. And I will never forget, he was about 10 feet in front of me. And as he's juggling these 3 white baseballs, the look of wonder on his face, I looked at the juggling balls aloft, I looked at him, and I said to myself, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that was it. Like, that was it. All of a sudden, here's this signature story that was real, and it was me. And I went home and I had this mission in life, and I just started practicing all the time because, given that I wasn't adept and good at sports, and I was existentially on a crash course to nihilism and nowhere, I found in juggling a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose, and I saw it as something that was quite wonderful that I could do, that was really inspiring. So that was the point.
What happened to the coin collection?
So here's the funny part of the story. I have continued throughout my entire life to collect coins, to the point where today I'm on the board of a national coin organization. I write regular columns on coins for coin magazines. I leave this weekend for a week-long coin convention in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And most of my spare time, whenever I have it, is spent reading about, studying, learning about, and collecting coins to this day.
So you didn't actually have to let go of that dream. I love that you managed to keep it with you, and that you have leadership roles and not deep commitment to that part of your interest. The juggling thing, I have a little story to tell. I joke. So I would do these like 2-hour presentations from 3 to 5 p.m. all the time. That was like the time slot that I asked for and I got. And it's all about networking. And I would joke, I'll do everything but juggle for them. It's like, I don't know how to juggle, but I do know how to juggle with the sticks.
Uh-huh.
So I was trying to impress someone. What else you learn? And I remember chasing myself around the backyard trying to do it, and then getting good enough to do it like over a badminton net, and then getting good enough to do it above the like power line and the tree branch, and getting it to come back to me. So even today, like if I walking by, like if I go to a Renaissance fair randomly and I see the sticks, I can get right into it. So it is funny how you can really work to learn something, but you manage to take what some would have considered, a party trick. I mean, not even like a thing people do for the rest of their life, but like a kind of fun party trick. And you've woven it into your speaking business. But I'm curious what happened between, 13 when you first learned this and today, which is how I know you. Did you go to college and have a, job, like a job? Like, was there a path like that? Or did you really immediately kind of continue down the path of speaking?
So I started down the path of being a comedy juggler and entertainer. And I continued doing that throughout my entire life until I added in speaking. So that's been how I've made a living throughout my entire life.
All right, hold on. I got to interject here. Who did you know who was in that business when you first got started?
I knew the 2 guys who taught the course in the 6th grade when I was in 6th grade. There were 2 local guys. Mike and Morris. They called themselves Molecular Manipulation. Looking back to that year, if I can imagine what they were, in my mind, they were these adults who knew how to juggle, and they were the coolest adults on the planet. They were probably a couple of hippies who agreed to like teach juggling at the local elementary school to get money for pizza and, you know, I don't know, snacks. I have no idea. But we've kept in touch over the years. I keep in touch with the two of them. They're continuously, there's no other word, flabbergasted at how far I've taken this, right? So when I'll message them and say, hey, I'm in Singapore, I'm doing a juggling keynote for some, you know, tech company. They're like, what are you even talking about? We taught you how to juggle when you were 12. Like, how is this happening? But yeah, it's happening. So I didn't know anybody else in the industry until maybe I was 15, and I got my first regular steady job at an amusement park, and I met some magicians, and started to fall into the magic community, and met some magicians, and actually some magicians who to this day in the magic community, or rather this day now in the magic community, are magicians of note. But back then we were just a bunch of guys performing at an amusement park in the middle of Connecticut. Yeah, I didn't really know.
I mean, you're a very committed person. The fact that you're still doing all those things with the coin collection, and that you're still doing juggling. Is there anything else that you started at a young age that you're like?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, my involvement in music, I've sung in punk bands and whatnot my entire life too. And I like the idea of expression having multiple forms, right? I like the idea that, you know, I can be on stage and doing a keynote, or I can be on stage, you know, with a keynote that includes, you know, comedy, juggling,
or you can be on stage shouting at people. I mean, it's different forms of expression.
Or there's different forms of expression, right? Because the thing is, none of us have a uniquely, I don't even know what the word is, singular approach to living, right? You and I are communicating in a very specific way for this episode, and maybe we'd communicate differently if we were sitting having a Sprite in a bar or whatever we'd be doing, right? You know, we'd communicate differently, we'd connect differently, or if we were having dinner with a bunch of friends, or if we were at a whatever event. So the point is that I like exploring those different forms of expression in my life, and especially when they involve creativity. But I do want to say, before I forget, that something you mentioned is important. The dedication, which is not uniquely mine, I think is a really important aspect of leadership too. We tend to have faith in leaders when they give us the sense that they are dedicated. Because sometimes we might be on a team and we might not be dedicated. So if we sense dedication in the person who is offering empathy or direction, it gives us certainly a sense of involvement and a sense of buy-in to the cause.
Yeah. I mean, most people, you know, they might dabble in magic or dabble in juggling. I loved magic when I was, you know, in camp as a kid and a preteen, but they don't commit to it. They're, like you said, there's a certain dedication, commitment to the ongoing effort to keep getting a little bit better. But I'm curious how that then became a career path. Did your family have, you know, support around this? Like, you're 18, 19 years old, you're like, nope, I'm going to keep doing this. Like, how they're like, doctor? And you're like, nope, juggling comedian. Lawyer? Nope, juggling comedian. Like, you know, so yeah. How do you sort of balance expectations? You said you're suburban Connecticut, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
rural Connecticut.
Rural Connecticut. Okay, so rural Connecticut, you don't know a lot of kids doing the things you're doing. Like, this isn't, you know, where do you get notoriety? You can go to work at your local, you know, play the fairs that are happening in town or something like that. So amusement parks. How do you see a path from rural Connecticut to this being a livelihood?
Well, you know, I started doing shows right away. You know, I was 13, just after my 13th birthday. I remember I performed at this girl Katie's birthday party. She lived across the street. And I remember writing Greg's magic juggling bag on a paper bag. And inside I had tennis balls, and I don't even know what else I had to juggle. But I walked over to her house and I juggled at this birthday party. And I made $5 for 15 minutes. And it was all the money in the world. I remember going home with that $5 bill, and it was all the money in the world. Now, keep in mind, this is decades ago, and minimum wage at the time in Connecticut was somewhere around $3.50 an hour or some ridiculous thing by modern standards. And I remember thinking, I just made more than 4 times minimum wage for 15 minutes of work. It's just like mind boggling to me.
Right.
Or rather, given 15 minutes of work, the equivalent of multiples of minimum wage. So I started doing shows, and what I started to do in order to do shows was I had business cards made. They said Greg Bennick, entertainment for all occasions, private juggling for all occasions. Greg Bennick, juggling for all occasions, private lessons given, and my phone number. And I started handing them out. I handed them out at the school. I handed them out at local churches and businesses, and just spread the word. Growing up in a rural town of maybe 7,000, 6,000 people, I don't even know, meant that I was, oh yeah, that's the Bennick kid. He's the juggler. Word spread because there weren't any other jugglers other than the 2 guys who taught me how. But all of a sudden I was this young kid. So I got invited to the town parade, and I got invited to this school. I got invited to this church or whatever. Yeah. So by the time I was going to college, I had a conversation with my parents, who were advocates for college, and we had a conversation. They both thought, you can land back on this, but maybe it's a good idea. And I remember my father being practical and quite wise and telling me, you can land back on this, but go to college for something, go do something. So I went to Syracuse University for all of 1 year, and with all love due to Syracuse, at the time, it was a pretty hard partying school, and I didn't drink. And I just wasn't a big, like I said, sports person. So I dropped out and did a year's apprenticeship with a theatrical mask maker in Connecticut, and learned how to make masks and perform theatrically with masks, and learned about masks as metaphor for the masks we wear. And then at the end of that year, he asked me, his name is Larry Hunt. He asked me, what are you going to do next year? I had no idea. He suggested, why don't you go out to Seattle? My friend works at a college out there, an art school. Maybe you could audition and get in. And I came to Seattle and auditioned for art school and got into theater school, and the rest is history. I just kept performing, focusing on theater. And from theater, I don't mean as an actor, but more as a performer with theatrical capabilities, and just took my career in that direction, meaning I kept doing juggling shows and made them more dramatic or funnier or more theatrical and that sort of thing. But yeah, it never stopped.
I see how people influenced you along the way, how you sort of tapped into your network, even at a time when you didn't know you had a network.
That's right.
How you listened and you were willing to do the thing. Like, I mean, someone might say, what you should do? Go to Seattle. And you're like, yeah, okay, fine. But like you actually went to Seattle and did the audition and moved forward with that. And, we don't always listen to these ideas that come floating towards us. But you were really passionate about this idea of moving forward and keep doing the juggling. When did you decide to go from, it sounds like you were making money, you were a performer, right? Mm-hmm. You were an entertainer. You were well known in that space. When did you start weaving in the story, the storytelling, the message behind it, that it wasn't just, being a juggler at a kid's, birthday party?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And it came very early on, but it wasn't actualized until later. I could tell you, yeah, when I was 15 or 16 and whatever happened, changed my life. And it did, but it didn't get actualized fully until later. And I'll tell you what I mean. At the time, I had gotten this job at this amusement park, and I was the juggler. I was walking around strolling, juggling. And this was an amusement park in Connecticut that had company parties in the summertime. So at one of these parties, Remington, the company that makes shavers, had rented the amusement park for their company picnic. Well, at the time, Remington was owned by a guy named Victor Kiam. And Victor Kiam, later the owner of the New England Patriots and sort of this just monolithic corporate figure, at the time, Victor Kiam was really famous in the Northeast for a series of TV commercials where he would stand in front of the camera, he would hold a razor next to his face, look right into the camera and say, "I'm Victor Kiam from Remington. I like this razor so much, I bought the company." Everyone knew that line, and everyone knew who he was. Well, here I am juggling at the Remington party at this amusement park, and I've got a red juggling ball, a blue juggling ball, and a yellow juggling ball. In walks Victor Kiam, and he's with a crowd of handlers. I don't even know how else to describe them. It's a summer day, and these guys are all in suits, and they're with Victor Kiam. They're bodyguards. They're just his crew, right? Victor Kiam sees me. He walks up to me. I'm at the time, like I said, 15, maybe 16 years old. I can't recall. And he says, "Hey, juggler, let me see those juggling balls." And I stop and I hand the juggling balls to Victor Kiam. He starts juggling the juggling balls, and all of his handlers immediately start they're clapping like this light, golf clap kind of clap, or this polite clap, not golf clap, polite clap. And Victor Kiam hands the juggling balls back to me. He says, "Those are pretty nice juggling balls." I took all three, I held them next to my face, and I said, "You know what? I like these juggling balls so much, I bought the company." Okay. There was a pause. No one laughed. And then Victor Kiam laughed. And then everyone laughed. All the handlers start laughing and clapping and doing their thing. And in that moment, I thought, oh, that's interesting. When you add in customized messaging, people are entertained beyond just juggling. I didn't even have to juggle. I just held up 3 juggling balls, and I just got this guy's attention, this, epic corporate.
I'm sorry. You're 16 and that's what you learned in that moment.
I mean,
like that's like an incredible takeaway, right? So, like I would have been like, wow, I was, kind of ballsy enough to make that joke. You know what I mean? You're like, that was really good market research. Look what I just learned.
So here's where I get back to the point about I didn't actualize it. I was 16, right? So I realized it. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm glad Victor Kiam's handlers didn't kill me. And then it wasn't just the solitary focus of my life was developing customized corporate material or any such thing. I went back to being, in like playing music with my friends and partying and doing whatever. And it didn't really fall into place until later. I would, definitely customize, as it were, but it wasn't until years later I thought, oh, wow, the stories that you're telling can really, really engage people. That didn't come until later. I mean, I would say that I was out of acting school probably before I really started to think about how I could use story to my best advantage. So yeah, probably early 20s or so when I really started to put that into effect.
But still, it's been a long time that you've had that kind of career now as a storyteller as well as a juggler.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And what's the focus let's say up until the pandemic? Who were you focusing on?
I mean, who was I focusing on?
Yeah, like companies, like, is it corporate? Is it like?
Yeah, corporate and associations. It's always been that way where, the national, whatever, juggling association or coin collecting. I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to think of an association without actually naming one, would hire me for a convention or
how did that change when the pandemic came?
Oh, well, I mean, everything shut down, right? So yeah. I remember there being a span of about 72 hours where I lost all of my business. And I remember calling friends in the industry saying, now what do we do? And everyone's going, I don't know, I'm sitting at home on lockdown. I have no idea what to do. I thought, okay, well, I'll focus on other things, research and writing and those sorts of things. And eventually, piece by piece, as everyone did, building a virtual studio and figuring out, what a video switcher was and why I need 3 cameras and why just having a single light bulb wasn't enough. And what do I do for audio and all those sorts of things? And that's what I did over the pandemic, is build up the virtual space. And then, of course, start pitching people and saying, hey, I'm available for virtual as well. So, and as you know, that, interestingly, is going to continue forever. There's always going to be virtual events, I'm sure. And there's also now, of course, live events as well again. But yeah, it all changed. It changed because the theater changed, the venue changed, and there's a different element between being a keynote speaker, say on the stage, or a performer on stage, and a performer in the virtual realm. It's a different theater. It's the same performer, just in a completely different venue. And any performer worth their salt, I think is the saying, knows how to adapt and change and bob and weave depending on what venue they're in and what audience they're in front of. So it just
I'm about as adept at sports ball as you are, it sounds. But here's the analogy I've used a few times. Let's see if it makes sense. You can't take soccer rules and apply it to hockey.
Yeah, what you said, absolutely, that works.
They're very similar, right? Like if you were just describing them, there's goals, you're moving an object from one end to the other. There's, forwards and backwards, and I don't know people, but but one's happening at an incredible speed, right?
Yep.
and has a stick and things are happening. So one has padding and there's much more physical contact. So it's like, I think once you accept that it's you take what you can learn from one and bring it into the other, but you have to learn the rules of the new in this case, sport. Yeah, it took me a moment too to sort of find my feet. You did some stuff. You were presenting for the California WIC Association, which is one of my long-term clients since 2020. I've had the pleasure of supporting them, and often for any association that I produce for, most of the speakers are people who are members of membership organizations that are really good at what they do, but they're not presenters, not professional, speakers and professional entertainers. But then often we'll get one professional speaker who's been hired, and it's often a person I know through National Speakers Association, or who I think I'd like to get to know in this case. And it's so far and above different, right? Because, most time I'm literally just teaching people, okay, you got your laptop, can you put on some books so that the camera is a little higher and you're not staring down at it? Like, I'm really working at that level. And then here you show up with this like full, virtual studio. But you did some magic and some, like, you were calling this guy. I mean, you did stuff that I'm behind the scenes, and I know for certain that this was not a setup. I know that these volunteers had no idea what was going on. And I was writing that in chat. I'm like, this is actually happening. Like, I was trying to like express my amazement because, people are so jaded. Oh, they chose people and worked it a lot in advance. I was like, no, I'm the one who helped everyone get set up for this event. So part of I talked about your session for weeks and weeks. I talked about it. And so that really stood out to me, because when we talk about like making a connection and being memorable and having engagement in a virtual space, back in March 2020, April 2020, we all thought, nah, I don't know, how are we gonna do that? And, this was just a few months ago. So clearly you'd had some time to work out the how. But how do you evolve? I mean, you had to take what you had done in person. What were some steps? Did you ask other people for help? How did you lean into your network? Like, how did that all work out?
It was most definitely network based, without a doubt, because there were some people who jumped on virtual right away. Okay. And like I said, I did spend a good amount of the very beginning of the pandemic reading, studying, not about virtual, not about performance, just doing other things. And by then there were some people who had jumped on this really quick and had made their mistakes and had learned their, through the school of hard knocks, figured out some basics. So I definitely turned to my network and asked for some help and advice and support. And I have one friend in particular. He and I have an ongoing joke about how we would, anytime either one of us would buy something, the other person would buy it too. And then we would, in terms of equipment, and then we would, bounce back and forth. So somebody, buys a video switcher. One of us buys a video switcher. The other one buys the exact same one. Some of us buys a switching deck, on and on and on and on and on. And we just figured it out, but it was network based for sure, and trial and error too. I mean, the video switcher itself, I bought one, then upgraded, and then a new one came out and I bought that and sold the other two. It was just a constant trial and error experience, all network based, without a doubt.
Yeah. And how did you first get connected with National Speakers Association? Is this something you've been a part of for a while?
Yeah. Well, National Speakers Association, I was a member many years ago, and I didn't quite understand what it was. Okay. And I mean, 15 years ago, I think I was a member, 10, maybe 12 years ago. I didn't quite understand what it was. And by what it was, it's obviously national and an association of speakers, but it's not just that. Meaning, I'm a member of a number of associations which are just that. They are national, the whatever association. Pay your dues and you're done. National Speakers Association, NSA, is full engagement. It's a full engagement association. You can pay your dues and do nothing. And I will argue that you'll get something out of your involvement, I guess. I'm even hesitating because I don't know what you'd get. It's full engagement. If you join NSA, and this isn't a pitch to listeners to join, although I would advocate anybody join. If you join and you go to influence the convention and you network and connect with other people, so much as not even network, just so much as meet other people, smile at them, say hi, you're going to get immense amounts out of your membership. And then if you join a local chapter, you're going to get immense amounts out of your membership. And like, if you do what I've done, join the board of the local association, the local chapter, you're going to get immense amounts. But in each of those two, there's levels of engagement. You could go to influence, sit in your hotel room the entire time, or you could go to influence, go to meetings, go to events, go to the sessions, talk to people, go out for drinks or whatever afterwards. And in the local level, get involved, be on the board, do things, be active, try to recruit more members, try to connect with others, and try to serve other people too. I mean, look at what you've done in terms of making yourself available for other people on the tech side of things, which is completely discombobulating for people. I mean, the tech thing is bananas for folks to try to wrap their heads around, and you've made yourself available. So I often think that as well, meaning there's people in the local chapter here in the Northwest who have done a few keynotes. There's people in the local chapter here in the Northwest who have won more Emmys than I can count. Okay, so what can we offer to people at different strata of experience from our expertise that makes their experience better? It's that full engagement. That's what NSA is about. So I didn't get that until a few years ago when I rejoined again. And I made a commitment to dive in and just be involved, be on the board, show up at Influence, talk to other people in different chapters across the country, and just really go full engagement style and see what came of it. And what came of it is, so far, great new friendships, some really good connections, some opportunities, sure, but a sense of community. It's been awesome.
What helped make that click a few years ago when you rejoined? What led you this time to commit to really being more involved?
I think a few years ago, I realized that I was being inherently lazy without intending to be lazy. I think that my career has come to me rather than me come to it, if that makes sense. And what I mean is that calls come in and referrals come in, but I don't actively pursue them. And a few years ago, I thought I'm being too passive in terms of the way that I'm approaching all of this. And even recently, I've heightened the stakes even more. And I'm like getting way more intensive about and intentional about the way that I approach my career. But I think a few years ago, I just realized, wait a minute, am I really going to just passively experience life? That doesn't strike me as being how I want to be. I want to be engaged with life and with the associations that I'm involved in or the people that I'm networked with. I want to be engaged rather than passive. So I think that's really where that came from, was just the desire to be more actively engaged, just more actively engaged.
I love it. So I want to give a shout out to Dorothy Wilhelm, who is, I think, the only surviving founding member of Pacific Northwest NSA chapter.
Wow.
And she regularly comes to my my weekly and monthly events. And she is turning 90 in January, and she's still speaking. And she took a course with me and got certified as a virtual event professional, and presents and does all these programming monthly and weekly on Zoom, and is paid her full fee to present on Zoom. So yeah, gives me a real sense of what I could be doing 40 years from now.
Absolutely.
But I also want to mention that I joined NSA in 2015, and I had just left my career as a fundraising professional, and I had been a member of that association, somewhat involved. Yeah, I gotten sort of more involved over the years. And so I said, I'm not going to wait 10 years and then join my association. I'm going to join, and I'm going to commit to going 10 years in a row to the conference and then decide whether it's worth it. And so this year was 9 years for me. And what happens when you make that level of commitment is by year 5, you start to find your place. And this is true for this is not just for NSA, for any association people are part of. If you're listening in, I think everything you just said about chapter leadership and active engagement, for me, I have actually managed to step aside from all chapter leadership obligations. That maybe in a couple of years I'll do that. But I host a monthly networking social for national, and I co-organize the Rainbow Speakers Group for LGBT speakers and our allies. And so you find your volunteer like leadership opportunity when you stick around more than 5 years. And I think that's part of what you're seeing is like the more you commit, you start to know people and engage with people. So I feel like a lot of what you just said would translate to probably any kind of association membership experience. Who introduced you initially into the world of NSA? Is there someone who sort of pointed out, because I think a lot of people don't realize speaking is even something you get paid to do. We know about like Tony Robbins level of a successor, but it's hard to sort of imagine like little old me. So when did you start to realize like, oh, I can actually get paid to do this? Or was that transition a little easier because you were already being paid as an entertainer?
Yeah, it's because I was already being paid as an entertainer. I realized that that speaking was a possibility, and I don't really recall where I got the NSA connection. I mean, like I mentioned, my mom has been speaking for years, and she doesn't speak the way, say, that you and I might speak or do a keynote necessarily. She's doing more like, and she's not really speaking at this point anymore, I don't think, professionally. And she wasn't really speaking actively professionally for a main part of her income. She was just doing these presentations, and was doing that for a long time. So I grew up with her being very communicative and community based and driven that way. So I think that was probably where I started thinking about, oh, I could be speaking, because I knew my mom was.
A little inside scoop there.
Yeah. And interestingly, my mom was never a member of National Speakers Association or any such thing. But I think that I just had my sort of speaker radar on, in a sense, and was able to think through, what is beyond just the juggling, because of my mom's involvement. And it's been quite cool to see her journey speaking to groups as well. It's been pretty fun. I got to see her speak for the first time maybe 6 years ago, and it was mind-boggling. It was like a life-changing experience.
Yeah. Is that mom? Wow.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, what happened was she's been speaking forever, and has told me she's been speaking forever, going back to, I mean, decades. And I just took it for granted. It's my mom. It's like, okay, she's speaking. Well, what happened was I was going to visit my parents on the East Coast. And my mom said, it's wonderful that you'll be here then, because I've got a speaking engagement at the local hospital. And I was like, great, I get to see you speak. It's fantastic. She's like, well, it's sold out. And I'm like, well, I hope you can get me in, And I was like, wait a minute, my mom's sold out? Like, as if my mom was Metallica or something. Like, what is this? And I went to this hospital that day with her, and lo and behold, a room full of seniors, because her topic is exercising as we age. A room full of seniors had paid like $2 each to come see her, and the room was packed. There was 150 people in the room. And here's my mom, all of about 4'10" of her, however tall she is, walking around, and she's got her little note cards, and she's waving at her friends, and I'm in the back of the room just watching her, and everyone is like in anticipation of her speaking. And she gets up to the front, and this woman introduces her. Our speaker today is Diane Bennick, and blah, 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 blah. And my mom's still just waving at her friends, being all sweet. And as soon as the woman said, please welcome Diane Bennick, my mom takes the center of the room and looks out at the audience. And with this intensity and passion that's hard to capture here right now, she says, as an opening line, if you don't exercise as you age, your friends will read about you in the paper after you've fallen and haven't been able to get yourself up again. And I was like, oh my God, did my mom just tell a room full of seniors that they're going to die and have their obituary read by their friends if they don't exercise? And she proceeded to do 90, not 9, not 19, 90 minutes for this audience, with intensity, with fun, with
Awesome.
whimsical stories. And I was blown
Yeah.
away. And she gets done with the 90 minutes and just says, thank you, and goes back to waving at her friends with their little note cards and walks off the stage. And like everyone's cheering. And I'm like, I couldn't believe what had just happened. So anyway, that's mom.
Really cool.
Mom
I have to
show.
tell you, getting a chance to finally see her do her thing must have been quite a treat for the two of you.
It
Hey,
was
we're
great.
about to get into my favorite wrap-up question, but before that,
Cool.
let's hear a quick word from our sponsor. All right, here's my favorite wrap-up question. So a year from now, we're going to be connecting again, and I know it's going to happen because we're going to be meeting at Influence in person. And hopefully we remember we had this conversation. I want to know, a year from now, when I'm talking to you about how the year has gone, what are we going to be celebrating on your behalf? What are you most looking forward to in the year ahead?
We will hopefully, if the timeline sticks, be holding copies of my new book.
Wow.
About my topic, Build a Better Now. So as we sit here today, contracts are in place to have the book go into writing mode and production mode and whatnot. And the timeline will be next summer for the release of the Build It Better Now book. And if you and I are standing holding copies of the book, we will be dancing a happy dance at Influence, and it'll be awesome. I mean,
I can't wait.
yeah,
Oh
me
my
too.
God. That is really, really, really exciting. And I, of course, want to be on your book launch team, as I'm sure
Please.
many people listening here are going to want to know how to do that. So, by the way, how can people find you and follow your work?
Absolutely. Well, gregbennick.com, GregBennick.com has all the information on me. And I'd be happy to have people follow me there in terms of reading the blog and whatnot. But also, if people want to check out Instagram, I post less frequently than I should, but when I post, it matters, at Greg Bennick, GregBennick. I'll be posting a lot more this year with book things happening and keynote things happening. So I'm pretty excited about that. And those are probably the best ways to reach me right now. I'd be happy to connect with anybody there anytime.
I'm going to get all those links in the show notes at ontheschmooze.com. Greg, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you. This has been amazing. Thanks for letting me relive and share some stories from the last few years. It's been a lot of fun.